So now let's take a look at the population and the environmental impact of that population. Now, more developed countries compared to less developed countries in terms of their impact in the environment. In a nutshell, remember that more developed countries use a bunch of resources compared to less developed countries. Nevertheless, less developed countries have the more people compared to more developed countries. In terms of impact, more developed countries have more impact on our environment than less developed countries that are more populated. So it's completely, upside down, right? It's upside down. So let's take a look at some numbers. So when we look at this this pie, okay, more developed country represent 20% of the world population, while developed countries represent 78% of the world population. Now, let's take a look at the impact on hazardous waste production. Mind that the 28% of more developed country people are responsible for 90% of the hazardous waste production, while the 78% of individuals in less developed countries are only responsible for 10% of the hazardous waste production. How about consumption of fossil fuel? Well, more developed countries are consuming 60% of all the fossil fuel that is produced, while less developed countries only consume 40%. How about metal? More developed countries consume 80% of all the metal, while less developed countries consume only 20%. How about paper? Well, less developed countries, while they are consuming 25% of all the paper that we produce, guess what? More developed countries are consuming 75% of all of that. Now, you see that the environmental impact in more developed countries is tremendously higher than the environmental impact in less developed countries. So when we talk about preserving our environment, who should do what? Right? Let me repeat that. When we talk about preserving our environment, who should do what? Right? So when we are in these big conversations that bring people across the world to talk about our environment and how we should preserve that environment, right? We have to take responsibility and do what we need to do to get where we need to get, right? Okay? So, the issues around environmental impact are basically overpopulation, okay? The resource consumption, right? We know that an average American family is going to consume the equivalent of 20 people in India per capita of resources. Can you imagine that? So one person in the United States consumes as much as 20 people in India, right? So again, 22% of the world population that make up the more developed countries are going to account for 90% of the hazardous waste. That is not sustainable, okay? Now, what are the characteristics of a population? We are going to shift our gears here. What are the characteristics of a population? The populations are going to vary tremendously over time, right? There are some environmental conditions that can affect a population. right? An environment is not always stable. There could be a harsh winter, there could be a very hot summer. All of that is affecting a population, right? There could be an intra-specific competition, right? Because the population is so high that we need the same environmental to live. So we're going to fight, we're going to kill each other off, and only the strongest are going to remain alive, right? And all these wars actually account for controlling a population growth, right? All the diseases account for controlling population growth, right? So individuals are going to be under pressure of natural selection. What this means is that the individual who is able to suit to its environment is the one that is going to survive. If you cannot suit to your environment, you're not going to survive. Okay? So better adapted individuals leave behind offsprings, while less adapted individuals will not leave behind offsprings. Okay? So now, let's take a look at the distribution of a population and the density of a population. Ecology looks at these different aspects. Now, when we consider a population, as the population grows, the patterns and the distribution of organisms is also going to be different, right? When we consider a plant, so here we have a shrub. The young, small shrubs are going to be, as you see here, clumped, right? They are clumped, okay? They are not just basically scattered randomly, right? They are clumped. However, when they reach a medium size, now they don't get clumped anymore. They kind of get spaced out, right? We see some kind of pattern that is now different from what we saw here, okay? Now, for large shrubs are going to have a particular distance at which they're going to be from each other, okay? Why so? Because they need a number of resources, right? So the resource is going to play a role on the composition of a population. These resources are going to be essential to support the organism in that environment, right? In terms of resource, we have food, we have water, habitat, space, okay? We are going to have soil moisture, so the amount of water in the soil, right? This is going to affect individuals and the distribution of individuals in that environment. Populations are going to be found where resources are available. If there is no resources, no population is going to be thrive there. And population density is going to vary based on resources, based on amount of individuals. And again, here we have a clumped, okay? We have random level of distribution, and we have a uniform level of distribution. Okay, I want you to remember that in terms of distribution, we have clumped, we have random, and we have uniform. Now, in terms of demographics, in a population growth, we're going to have the number of individuals born and the number of individuals that die for every single year. That allows us to determine actually the population growth. that growth is going to actually decline or increase depending on the situation, depending of the amount of resources, right? So the demographics are going to depend on available resources, right, in a population, which is going to actually lead us to the next aspect. It's the age structure. In the age structure, I already said that it was divided into three subgroups. I'm not going to talk about that again, but what I would like to mention here, it's that based on how the population grows, we are going to have an increased population with a wide base, right? So people in productive age are going to be more numerous than anyone else. Decreasing populations are going to have a narrow base, right? Where people in pre-reproductive age are going to be less numerous than people in reproductive and post-reproductive age, right? The population is going to decline. And then we have a stable population where we're going to have almost as many people in pre-reproductive age as people in reproductive age. Okay? So, now let's take a look at the life table and the survival shape. Now, the life table and the survival shape actually addresses how a population is going to change based on the history of their life during their lifetime. All right? So, that survivorship, it's basically how the age at death influence the population size. That age of death and how they're going to influence the population size is going to change from one organism, from one species to another, right? So that we have three kind of survivorship, right? And here we have the life history and survivorship of adult sheep. The adult sheep actually is going to live up to a certain age, and then we're going to see that when they reach a certain age, they are very likely to die. But what is the type of survivorship here? So before we dive into the type of survivorship, let's first define the life table. The life table, it's that for a given population, you have a number of individuals that live and a number of individuals that are going to die. The question though, it's what is the age at which these individuals are diving or surviving? Here is the thing. When we consider the adult sheep, okay, we see that if we consider a population of 1,000 individual, new individuals, right? So at age 1, all the 1,000 individuals are still going to be there, right? But by age 2, we're going to have about 801 individuals that are still alive, which means that 199 individuals died. So you're going to see that as you go down in age, right? So for instance, at age 14 and 15 years, you have no more individuals left. But at age 13 and 14, we still have 3 individuals left out of the 1,000 that was born at some point, which tells you that the life expectancy for adult sheep, it's around 15 years old. Okay? At 15 years old, they're all going to be dead. All right? So we see that over time, for instance, at age 2, it is not very likely that a doll sheep is going to die. Okay? At age 1, it is not very likely that a doll sheep is going to die. But at age 12, the likelihood that they're going to die is very high. So now, how does that affect the survivorship? Now, let's move to the next thing. How does that affect the survivorship? So we see that for 1,000 doll sheep, well, they are going to survive for a long period of time. And then toward age 10, 12, 13, 15, they will start all dying. Okay? This is survivorship type 1. Human organisms have a type of survivorship that is type 1, because there is not likely that you are going to die when you are a child, but it is very likely that you are going to die at 80 years old or 70 years old, right? That's type 1 survivorship. In type 2 survivorship, the population is going to decline in a proportional manner. Okay? They're going to decline in a proportional manner, or a constant manner, I should say, in a constant manner, because the organisms can die at about any time in their lives. Okay? It doesn't really depend on the age. Whether they are babies or they are middle age or old age, they can all die anytime. Okay? This is true for squirrels, by the way. This is true for hydra, right? And then you have survivorship type 3, which is the case, for instance, of oysters. This have a very high chance of death when they are still young, and only a small proportion is going to live to reach adulthood. Okay? So this is what this blue curve is showing, right? So again, survivorship, it's how age at death affect population size, right? Each species is going to have its own survivorship curve, okay? And there are 3 types of curve: type 1, type 2, type 3, okay? Type 1, you live a long time and then you die at an old age, right? Type 2, you can die about any time. Type 3, most likely you die in young age. Only small proportion is left to reach adulthood and reproduce and leave behind offsprings. All right? So now let's talk about the biotic potential. The biotic potential, it's actually how an organism is able to reproduce to its full potential, and this only happens when resources is not limited. For instance, there is no competition with space. There is plenty of food. There is plenty of everything. Conditions are ideal. Temperature is ideal. So the organisms in these conditions are going to produce the most offspring possible, imaginable, right? Now, this biotic potential varies from one organism to another. For instance, a rhino has its biotic potential, that is 1 or 2 calves when they give birth. But as opposition, mice, actually they have a biotic potential that is very high, because they are producing a lot of organisms in one single birth event, right? So to reach the full potential, this is going to depend on a bunch of things: availability of resources, number of offsprings per event, the chances of survival until reproduction is possible, the frequency of reproduction, the age at which reproduction starts. All of that is going to affect a population and is going to affect demographics. So now, when we look at the population, though, we're going to ask, okay, what is the pattern of population growth? There are two kind of population growth. We have the exponential population growth and the other one is boy. Okay, in terms of population growth, there are two kinds of population growth. These two kinds of population growth are going to depend on biotic conditions and abiotic conditions, right? In biotic conditions, we are going to have a relationship between living organisms, and abiotic conditions, we're going to have, the environment, right? All of that is going to affect the growth of a population. In any case, there are two types of growth populations. We are going to have the exponential growth type and the logistic growth type. The exponential growth type, it's a growth that occurs when resources are unlimited, right? Populations can grow quickly and fast in large amount, constantly, non-stop. But we know that in nature that doesn't exist, right? That doesn't exist. So that there is always something that happens so that a population growth can be leveled off, right? Now, that takes us to the logistic growth curve. Now, in the logistic growth curve, notice that a population starts with a lag phase, and then you have an exponential growth. That exponential growth is going to reach a ceiling, right? That ceiling is because of the amount of resources that are available in the environment. And also, things that are happening in the environment are going to level off that production, that population growth. And that leveling off of population growth in a logistic growth curve, it's actually carrying capacity. A given geographical area can only provide resources for so many organisms at a time, right? That's why there is going to be a leveling off of population growth, okay? So we see here the caterpillars here when butterflies are laying eggs, they lay hundreds of eggs. These hundreds of eggs, when they hatch, you're going to have a bunch of caterpillars, right? But only a very small amount is going to survive to become adult and leave behind offsprings. But let me close the parenthesis. When we consider that population, that trout, okay, that trout can only grow so much in population, and that population is going to level off, right? So the population is going to follow sustainability. A population can only grow so much, and then resources is going to decrease, and then that population is going to crash. For instance, when we consider fishing, right? This is the case where in the 1950s there was fishing in an area, and when we see the amount of fish caught, okay, in the 1950s, the amount of fish caught was increasing until close to the 1970s. Now, sometimes before 1970s, the amount of fish caught started declining, okay, now that amount of fish caught that started declining, okay, they also followed the pattern of the amount of fish remaining. So you cannot overuse your resources at some point, right? The amount of available resource is going to affect the population itself, right? So that speaks to the sustainability of population and density. All right. So when we consider the effect of the environment in a population, we are going to have really two aspects. We're going to have living organisms are going to affect the growth of a population, but you also have independent factors that are not associated with living organisms, right? For instance, temperature. A cold winter does not depend on living organisms, right? A flood does not depend on living organisms, right? So we have what we call density independent and density dependent factors that are going to affect a population. The density independent factors are going to be abiotic factors, for instance, weather, natural disasters, okay, for instance, a volcano that erupts, right? This is going to actually a natural disaster, okay? And how this natural disaster are affecting a population doesn't depend on the population density, right? So for instance, a flooding event that occurs in this population with low density and in this population with high density, the impact is going to be exactly the same in both population, in spite of the fact that the initial density was different. Why? Because the environmental condition does not take into account how many individuals are there. Okay? It just does what it does, right? So the flood event impact the same way the population of mouse here. Now, the density dependent factors. In the density dependent factors, now it is going to be important to consider how many individuals are in the environment, right? So in a low density areas, everyone is able to find a shelter here because there are actually more shelters than number of individuals. But now the minute we have more individuals than shelter, then now we are going to see some individuals that actually don't have a place to go, okay? Which is going to cause them to go to some other place and look for shelter, which is going to affect the density of population, right? In that, which is going to consider to affect population growth in that area, okay? So predation can affect population. How predation affects a low density population, okay, is going to have more impact than predation in high density population, right? So if one mouse here is caught, the impact on the population is not going to be the same as one mouse being caught here. However, it is also a fact that this bird of prey here actually is going to have more chances to get food in this high density area than in this low density area, right? So in high density area, it's not easy for the prey to hide, while in low density area, it's easier to hide. All right. So another example of how population is affected by predation, it's that of the snowshoe hare here and the lynx. So we notice that over the years, when the population of the snowshoe hare increases, the population of lynx increases too. The lynx being a predator, right? When the population of snowshoe hare decreases, the population of lynxes increases too. So that we have, oh, well, we have some wildlife happening right behind me. Pretty interesting. But anyway, well, I'm in the wildlife, so it makes sense. Um, so you have an increase in the population and a decrease in the population, and it's cyclic, right? Then we have the life history pattern and extinction. That life history pattern is going to divide organisms into two groups. You have group one is the opportunistic species, and group two is the equilibrium species. Opportunistic species are going to be characterized by the fact that they have an exponential growth. The member of the individual members in this population are going to mature fast, okay? And they are also going to die off fast, okay? So density independent factors are going to regulate tremendously that population, okay? So I want you to remember that opportunistic species are going to be small individuals. Generally, they're going to be small in size, right? They're going to have a short lifespan, okay? They're going to mature early. They're going to have many offsprings, and they're going to have little to no care for their offsprings, as opposition to equilibrium species that are actually going to have a logistic growth type of growth rate, right? The population is going to grow following a logistic growth pattern, right? The individuals are going to be very large in size. They're going to have a small number of offspring. They're going to provide care for a long time. Okay? Up. Oh no. Oh, what? Okay. They're going to provide care for a long time, and they are also going to have a long lifespan, and going to be able to live only a limited amount of offspring. Now, how about extinction? Well, extinction is a total disappearance of species or higher group in a given geographical area, right? Extinction can be caused by human activity. It can be caused by global changes. The size of geographic range and degree of habitat can also drive extinction, okay? Tolerance, being able to tolerate changes or not tolerate changes, is going to affect extinction, okay? Equilibrium species are going to be very sensitive to extinction, okay? While opportunistic species are going to be less likely to go extinct, okay? So we have many organisms that are threatened or are now extinct, okay? So we have, in terms of animals, a number of organisms here that are either threatened to extinction or have disappeared. In terms of plants, you have many organisms here that are either threatened to extinction or are now extinct, okay? So it is a major issue that we have. And finally, for this chapter, remember to review your notes, to summarize your notes. Go at the end of the chapter, okay? Check the end of the chapter, check the summary page, assess your knowledge, right? Write some questions, design some questions to see if you understand the chapter. Practice with the questions that are at the end of the chapter so you can see if you are able to, master the content or not. And very importantly, create a handwritten concept map, okay, for this very chapter. And again, handwritten because this is going to help you a lot. All right? Okay, so this is where we are going to stop for today. Thank you for your attention. Bye.